Welcome to lecture for Psych 310. We'll be talking today about the personality disorders, which are diagnosed on Axis 2 using the DSM multi-axial system. We'll start off with just a general definition, right, of what a personality disorder is. Right? So, part of it, it's an enduring pattern of inner experience and behavior, right? Which that's what personality is, right? So, what does that mean to you when you say, okay, a pattern of inner experience and behavior? So we'll start with inner experience. What's an inner experience? Is that your if your stomach rumbles? Sort of, but not really. Mostly what we're talking about here, in terms of pattern of inner experience, are thoughts and feelings, right? So the way you typically think, what you typically think about, if you're more impulsive or less impulsive, if you tend to think about other people's needs, you think about your own needs. If you have kind of worry cognitions more or less worry. For emotion, both types of emotion, intensity of emotion, stability of emotion. So you typically pretty happy, typically pretty sad, typically pretty angry. Angry outbursts, switch from one strong emotion to another strong emotion. Experience no strong emotions, but have really kind of restricted experience of emotions. And then behavior, obviously, is what you typically do. How are you typically with people, despite whatever's going on inside of you? How do you treat people? How do you come across? How do you talk? How do you interact? Do you approach? Do you withdraw? All these things together, if they're fairly stable, they make up a pattern, right, of how you are as a person, and that's personality. And then if we go on with the definition, we get to see where it becomes a disorder. So it deviates markedly from the expectations of the individual's culture. And like a lot of things in the DSM, this is put there with good intentions, with the idea that we shouldn't pathologize people from another culture just because we don't understand it. And so when you make a diagnosis, you should take into consideration completely the person's culture of origin. Doesn't always happen, and sometimes can't always happen because sometimes people lack a cultural awareness, and they aren't aware of exactly what constitutes or makes up the client's culture of origin. But the idea here is that if that's how you were raised and you're expected to be, and that's kind of a functioning set of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors for your cultural group, then it's not pathology, even though it may be different from some other cultural group's way of thinking or feeling. And one of the examples I always think about here is the way people respond to death, to the loss of a loved one. And there are obviously individual differences in how people grieve, but there are also some discernible cultural differences. If we look from one cultural group to another, people grieve differently. There are kind of different cultural rules for how to grieve, how publicly to grieve, about what you wear. Some people in some cultures, you wear black for a year if you lose your spouse. You wear your mourning clothes. In some cultures, you're expected to put on a brave face and not look sad. In other cultures, they would think, wow, that's really pathological. But again, it's about understanding what's appropriate and accepted in a given culture. So if your pattern of inner experience is different from that of the assessor, but it's consistent with your culture, shouldn't be pathologized, shouldn't be diagnosis. And then this pattern of inner experience behavior, so your personality is pervasive and inflexible. So pervasive is you're not just this way in one setting. So somebody who's an athlete and involved in some sort of competitive sport, that to do well in that sport, she or he needs to be very aggressive and assertive, and sometimes disregard the rights of others. Right? Okay. Oh, were you in that spot? Okay, I'm sorry. I'll wait my turn. No, you bump them out of the way. Right? To do well, you may have to have certain behaviors and certain thoughts that fit to that setting, and it's adaptive for that setting. But that aggression and assertiveness might be less adaptive. If you go to the bank and somebody's in line in front of you and you give them a hip check, that you're probably going to get in trouble. So it's pervasive. This pattern, it's across settings, not just settings for which they're appropriate. And that's where the other part comes in. The inflexible is that you can't change how you are, how you think, how you feel when the situation demands it. So if you're super assertive and aggressive and you're in a situation where that's going to be punished and it's not appropriate, but you can't help yourself, then you have an inflexible pattern. Right? Most of us can alter how we are. People think, oh, well, I'm always this way. I'm always shy. No, even really shy people, when the situation demands it, can make themselves act more extroverted for a period of time. Usually, right? There's flexibility there if we have kind of healthy personality. And for personality disorders, the thinking is that they have less flexibility. They can't not be that way, whatever way it is we're talking about, whichever disorder. It's inflexible, and it's across settings. So we thought that the onset is in adolescence or early adulthood, which is consistent with some personality theories about when personality is formed, and the personality theorists can't really agree on exactly when personality is formed, but generally it's thought that adolescence, early adulthood, by then you've developed your key personality features. So it makes sense then that if you have disordered personality, it would also occur by this time. Right? So when the personality is developing, it develops in a pathological way. Okay. And then the pattern is stable over time. So it's not just for a couple of months. Maybe you moved to a new town and your situation changed, and so you were like a different person for a while, and then you went back to being your old self. Now you're this way pretty much all the time. And then, like anything else, it leads to, that's in the DSM, it leads to distress or impairment. So being this way causes problems for you. Right? So it's interesting, though, that for the personality disorders, probably the least likely group of disorders to cause distress. They may cause impairment, but people don't usually present to a clinic saying, "I've got my personality is messed up. Can you help me?" It's personality disorders are ego-systonic. They're consistent with the way people see themselves, so they're not bothered by it. If they're really assertive and aggressive to a pathological degree, they think that they should be that way, and other people who aren't that way are patsies and pushovers. So it doesn't bother them that they're that way. It may bother them that they get in trouble for it. Right? That's where the distress may come, but usually they're not bothered by the way that they are. Usually, there are some exceptions. Okay, so that's kind of the general definition of personality disorders. And before we can go on and look at the criteria for the individual groups, let's talk a little bit more about a few other things just to be thinking about and kind of keep in mind. Questions to ask yourself when reading about these personality disorders. One is that is it better to think of them as they're presented in the DSM as categorical in nature, or are they more dimensional? And when we ask that question, we think, do they represent a different kind of inner experiences and personality? So inner experience and behaviors, are these different personalities than normal or healthy personalities, or is it just a matter of difference of degree of inner experiences and behavior? So for something like histrionic personality disorder, which we'll talk to in a little bit, one of the criteria is they're suggestible, high in suggestibility. So is somebody who's histrionic and has suggestibility and all these other traits, is that different qualitatively than other people, or are we all more or less suggestible and all more or less the other criteria together? And people who meet diagnostic criteria for that personality disorder, are they just higher on those aspects, on those personality traits, or is it really a different type of personality? So one thing to kind of think about when trying to figure, I don't know if it's different kind or different degree, is what are the dimensions of personality? And there are as many dimensions of personality as you can probably think of descriptors for what people are like. Each descriptor could be considered a dimension of personality. Somebody could be more or less lazy, more or less fastidious, more or less miserly. Right? Any description you can think of a person, but not a physical description, that could be a dimension of personality. People could vary in some degree. But in general, research has indicated that we can kind of cluster all these different dimensions into 5 5 major factors, which use the acronym OCEAN to help us remember. It stands for openness, which is openness to experience, conscientiousness, which is about being on time, keeping things organized, following the rules, extroversion versus introversion. Like enjoying being around people and drawing energy from being around others and lots of stimulation versus preferring more solitude and less stimulation. A is for agreeableness, which in some ways is how nice are you, but at high levels it's kind of how gullible are you. If you agree to do things for people, versus very low agreeableness, very like, no, I'm not doing anything for you. I don't like people. I don't trust people. And very high is, oh, I trust everybody. And then the N would be neuroticism, which is borrowing from an old term, a general measure of experience of negative affectivity. So anxiety, depression, any kind of negative emotions. The more negative emotions you experience on a regular basis, the higher you are on neuroticism. So based on some statistical procedures, most notably factor analysis, researchers have determined that it seems we can take all these different descriptions of personality, and if we measure them, they'll cluster together into these 5 factors. So any descriptor you can think of, you could kind of imagine placing one of them into one of these 5 categories. So the people who are, if you're outgoing and you like to you talk a lot, you're gregarious, you're a risk taker, right? So these are different things that all, according to research, load on the factor of extroversion, such that people who are high on risk taking are also high on sociability. Right? So those things are correlated, they go together, whereas if you're high on those things, you may or may not be high or low on any of the other factors. So they've said, okay, you can take all the descriptors and you can parse them out into these 5 factors, generally, although it's not full agreement. But for personality disorders, we might think about different combinations of being high or low on these different factors might correspond to diagnostic categories. Okay, which most of the diagnostic categories involving probably high levels of neuroticism. Okay. Other questions. Are the personality disorder, is there gender bias with the creation or use of them? And this is a debated topic, and one reason that we suspect gender bias is there are gender differences. From looking from one disorder to the next, we'll see significant discrepancies in the number of men versus the number of women that are diagnosed with certain labels. Men much more likely to be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. Women more likely to be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder. And the question is, well, where does the bias come from? Are the diagnostic categories and criteria themselves biased? And it's debatable. I think you can make the argument that some of them are. Histrionic personality disorder seems to be the pathologizing hyperfemininity. Like think about masculinity and femininity, which aren't the same thing as man and woman, but aspects of these gender roles. People who would score really high on measures of femininity would probably meet criteria for some of the personality disorders, including histrionic personality disorder, maybe even dependent personality disorder. Whereas somebody scores really high on measures of masculinity, there are fewer disorders there to fit that. Maybe antisocial personality disorder in terms of disregard for the rights of others, but in terms of other things like being emotionally closed off, not open to divulging your own experiences, you could kind of think, okay, well, there's some patterns of inner cognitions and behaviors, the way that some men are in relationships, that would be pathological, but there's no diagnosis for that. And the majority of people who wrote and voted on the construction of these diagnostic categories and the criteria historically have been men. So yeah, there probably is some gender bias. Exactly where it is and where it comes from, not sure. But some of the categories may be more biased than others, and then there is also inevitably going to be bias whenever the diagnostic category are applied by individuals, because individuals will take their bias with them. Even though as clinicians you're trained to try to be aware of your biases to limit their impact, you can't eliminate them. So two people both present with the same exact symptoms, one a man, one a woman, and they may end up with different diagnoses, right? Because the criteria will be applied differently. Okay, well, you've in the past month been with 6 different sexual partners, right? If that's a man, they may not see that as pathological at all. They say, "Wow, you're really getting around." For a woman, they say, "Wow, that sounds like instability of relationships. That might be borderline personality disorder," right? Because when we apply these diagnostic criteria, it's in the context of our biases related to gender roles and expectations for men and expectations for women. Okay. So there may be bias in the criterion, in the categories themselves, and then there's definitely bias in how they're applied. Another question about personality disorders is, why is the level of comorbidity so high? And this is comorbidity with other personality disorders and with other Axis 1 disorders. For example, if people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, in one study they reported 85% of individuals who met criteria for that personality disorder also had an Axis 1 diagnosis. We also know there's a lot of overlap, where if you get one personality disorder, you're pretty likely going to have another Axis 2 or personality disorder diagnosis. So is it the case that people really do have these different problems? Maybe, and it could be that one problem precipitates another problem. Especially with Axis 1, Axis 2, where we say, okay, well, having this Axis 2 disorder, having this pathological personality, having this way of interacting with the world, which is what personality is largely about, if it causes you interpersonal distress and it screws up your relationships, it wouldn't be surprising to see you experiencing levels of anxiety and depression that were clinically significant. So shouldn't be too surprised to see some Axis 1 disorders, major depression, maybe generalized anxiety disorder, co-occurring with some of the personality disorders. So that may be that there's different problems, and the problems may be related where one influences the development of the other. But a part of it can also be the fact that we have not the best diagnostic criteria, and not the best in terms of clearly identifying this thing is different than this thing, right? Because we don't have, there's not mutual exclusivity. There's overlapping diagnostic criteria, such that one particular behavior might be diagnosable in multiple disorders, might be indicative of more than one thing. And because of this symptom overlap, it can be hard to say, okay, well, you have this symptom, and it could be this, or it could be this, and you have a couple other symptoms of each. Oh, I don't know if it's this or this, but you meet criteria for both, so you have both. So is it really you have both, or do you really just have one of those disorders and one or two other symptoms or behaviors that happen to be consistent with the other disorder, but you don't really have that disorder? You don't respond to treatment the same way as other people who have that disorder. You don't have the same background as people who have that disorder, such that disorder doesn't seem to describe you well. So yeah, there are problems with current diagnostic criteria in terms of symptom overlap, and that's one of the things that allegedly will be addressed with the next version of the DSM. Okay, so we've talked about the definition of personality disorders. Now for the diagnostic criteria for personality disorders, in general, it's a pervasive pattern of inner experiences and behaviors. So all the stuff we talked about before, beginning by early adulthood, just like we said, and present in a variety of contexts. So there's that pervasive, and then as indicated by X numbers of or more of the following. And the number of symptoms of criteria you have to meet differs depending on which disorder we're talking about. But in general, they all kind of go like that. 4 of this many, or 7 of this many, whatever it is. And then there's some rule out. Does not occur exclusively during the course of some other disorder, and the different disorders will name certain particular ones to help you make sure you distinguish between them. Like the cluster A personality disorders frequently say does not occur exclusively during the course of schizophrenia, right? So if the symptoms only occur when you're having these kind of Axis 1 episodes, which are thought to be more time limited, then it's not a personality disorder, it's just that Axis 1 disorder. But again, rather than that happening that way where you just get one disorder, what tends to happen is you get diagnosed with the Axis 1 disorder and the Axis 2 disorder in real practice. And then it's not in the criteria, but as in the definition in the DSM we talked about already, it's also noted that the pattern deviates from expectations of the individual's culture. So that part's not built into the criteria, but it's kind of elsewhere in the manual that some clinicians, again, ignore, sometimes unintentionally. Okay, let's take a look at the personality disorders. We break them up into clusters, and there's some evidence that the clusters are distinct, such that people who have a cluster A disorder are more similar to each other than they are to people that have cluster B or C, but not entirely. And some people might have a disorder from more than one cluster, which would kind of negate the importance of having these clusters. But when they first developed them, they thought, okay, these seem to all to be similar. These couple of disorders seem to be similar to each other and different from the others. We'll put them in a cluster. Same thing with B. Same thing with C. And they do have some commonalities in terms of the criteria. So, cluster A disorders, individuals generally appear to be odd or eccentric. It includes paranoid personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, and schizotypal personality disorder. And there's ongoing debate, like most things about diagnostic categories. But many people feel that these personality disorders actually just reflect manifestations of something that's diagnosed on Axis 1 in terms of schizophrenia, delusional disorder, all these things which are thought to be on the schizophrenic spectrum. So the idea that there's some spectrum that people vary from very much like schizophrenia to not at all like schizophrenia, and that people with these personality disorders are above the norm in terms of what people are typical people are on this spectrum. You know, most people aren't very schizophrenic, but they're not as high on the continuum as people who meet criteria for the full-blown Axis 1 disorder. You know, they're not having well-developed hallucinations and delusions, but they're kind of like they're almost there. And some people think that these personality disorders may even be prodromal forms of the Axis 1 disorders. And prodromal just means before you develop the full syndrome, right? Such that you might have paranoid personality disorder now, but then later go on to develop, after you have your first psychotic episode, develop paranoid schizophrenia. Okay. But there is debate about that. But in many ways, it makes sense, and some of the research supports that they are on a continuum. Okay, so looking at these, the first one, paranoid personality disorder, involves pervasive distrust and suspiciousness of others, such that their motives are interpreted as malevolent, as indicated by 4 of the following. So you just have 4 symptoms. So it's distrust and suspicion. So not necessarily to the level of paranoia that the government's spying on me, right? Or aliens are trying to read my thoughts and I have to stop them, right? It's not to that. It's not quite that level, but just general being a distrustful and suspicious person, and thinking that people are out to get you. So suspects without sufficient basis that others are exploiting, harming, or deceiving him or her. And this can be tough to verify, because you have to figure out whether or not they have sufficient basis to think people are exploiting them. So if you have somebody who's maybe an older adult who's being taken care of by his or her family, and they receive disability checks, which their family says, we'll cash them for you and we'll take care of you, and they are suspicious that their family's ripping them off. How do you know that the family's not ripping them off, or the family really is just trying to take care of this person? Sometimes it can be difficult to figure that out, and that's why we don't use just one symptom to diagnose a disorder. So they have to have more than that. So might have preoccupied with unjustified doubts about the loyalty or trustworthiness of friends, which again, we're kind of getting into some of the problems with these criteria. If you have the first one, if you suspect people are exploiting, harming, or deceiving you, how could you not have the second one, right? How could you not be preoccupied? Say, oh yeah, I think people are ripping me off, but no, I never think about it. I'm not worried about it. So in some ways, these aren't separate criteria. They're highly correlated criteria, which is problematic from a diagnostic standpoint. Another one reads hidden demeaning or threatening meanings into benign remarks or events. So if somebody says, "Oh, I hope you have a nice day," think, "Oh, really? You hope I have a nice day?" So you might do something to make me not have a nice day. Okay, I'm on to you. So people say things that aren't threatening, but seeing malevolence there. And then here's an interesting one: persistently bears grudges. Right? So this criteria is a little bit different from the other ones, right? But it's thought to be related in part of the overall pattern of inner experiences and behaviors that. And it makes sense if you think about, okay, well, if people are out to get you, then if they've ever wronged you, you better not forget about it, because they're going to come back and get you again. Whereas if you don't think people are out to get you, somebody wrongs you, it's easier to forgive them because, well, they did this and it wasn't nice, but they probably won't do it again. If you think they will do it again, you will bear a grudge. You'll hold on to that and probably think about it a good bit. Perceives attacks on his or her character that aren't apparent to others and is quick to react angrily, which is similar to the 1, 2 above, with the addition here of the quick to act angrily. So somebody who lashes out and not just is angry, but angry because they think somebody has slighted them, right? They've disrespected them. Might be paranoid personality disorder. And then has recurrent suspicions without justification regarding the fidelity of a partner. Okay. And again, can be difficult sometimes to determine if there's sufficient justification or not. Especially, unfortunately, seems in this area, if there's a couple and one member of the couple is deployed, the husband or the wife, both members of the couple frequently have recurrent suspicions regarding the fidelity of the partner. And whether or not there's sufficient justification is debatable. In some cases, it seems that, yeah, it makes sense that you'd be suspicious given what your friends are talking about, either over there or back here, regarding both places, right? Okay, but paranoid personality disorder in general, 4 of these things, again, it's all about not trusting people and being suspicious. So not this organized set of beliefs around some organization out to get you, but in general, people can't be trusted. Okay. And believing it to a degree that it affects your relationships, right? So it's causing impairment or distress. And again, probably not distress in terms of, yeah, I really wish I wasn't so mistrustful, but why do you think I should be different? You're trying to get me too, aren't you? And so they don't see themselves as being too mistrustful, but they may be aware of the problems that are existing in their lives. Whether or not they mean that connection between their degree of mistrust and suspicion and the problems varies by individual. Okay, schizoid personality disorder. This one's a pervasive pattern of detachment from social relationships, so not being connected to other people, and a restricted range of expression of emotions in interpersonal settings, as indicated by 4 of the following. So whenever they're interacting with people, if somebody tells a joke, if they laugh, which they probably wouldn't, if they did, it would be like, ha ha, but they wouldn't smile, their eyes wouldn't light up. If they told you that their dog died, my dog died yesterday, there'd be no tonal modulation, nothing in their voice, in the expression of their emotion that will be consistent with what they're talking about. There's a mismatch there. There's some sort of disconnect between what you would expect to be their internal emotional experience, which we can't observe, and their outward expression, which we can observe. So, well, in this situation, we would expect you to look happy or to look sad or to look angry, and they don't. Right? So they don't. They aren't emotionally expressive, and they're detached socially. So these individuals neither desire nor enjoy close relationships. So this isn't the shy person pining away and just kind of, well, I'm a little socially awkward. I wish I could be around people more. The thinking here is that there's no real desire to get close to people. They may interact with people, but they won't have really close friends. Consistent with that, they'll always choose solitary activities. Has little, if any, interest in sexual experience with another person. And not that they have no sexual desire. They may masturbate, but they have no desire to experience sexual contact in an interpersonal setting. Takes pleasure in few activities. Just doesn't seem to enjoy doing things. Lacks close confidants other than first-degree relatives. Appears indifferent to the praise or criticism of others. Oh, that was so great. Okay. You suck. Okay. So again, just this kind of disconnect from other people. And then going back to that emotion, shows emotional coldness, detachment, or flattened affect. Which flattened affect is, again, just not showing any emotion and being very flat like this. And yes, the most horrible thing happened yesterday, but then the most wonderful thing happened this morning. So people that seem apart from the world interpersonally. And at the first criterion we talked about there was they don't desire or enjoy close relationships, and they certainly don't seek out close relationships. They don't have close relationships. And if you ask them, do you want to be in a close relationship? No, I don't. Are you afraid to be in one? No, I'm just not interested. But in some research in people that were diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder, some of them, when interviewed and using various assessment tools, including writing, indicated that they do find the loneliness painful. So what's not clear is, does that mean we have a misunderstanding of the personality disorder, or were those people misdiagnosed, and really people who truly have schizoid personality disorder really have no desire? And the people that wrote the DSM would obviously argue that those people were misdiagnosed, and that when the initial assessment took place, people didn't do a thorough enough assessment to really determine if they desired close relationships. And not just, I don't want to be in one because I'm scared of getting hurt, but that, no, if I got hurt, didn't get hurt, I wouldn't get hurt. People have no interest for me. Right? Okay, related to that one is schizotypal. Right? This one is a pervasive pattern of interpersonal deficits marked by acute discomfort with and reduced capacity for close relationships, as well as by cognitive or perceptual distortions and eccentricities of behavior, as indicated by 5 symptoms. Right? So these people are also going to be the loners, right? Discomfort and reduced capacity for close relationships. They're not good at being in close relationships, and they have these interpersonal deficits. They're socially awkward. They don't maintain eye contact properly. They may talk inappropriately, tell inappropriate stories, and talk at length about something that interests them without picking up on the feedback from somebody else that they're not interested. And they're and probably because of their interpersonal deficits, they're uncomfortable interacting with people, especially at an intimate level, because they're not sure of themselves. But they differ from the schizoid individuals in that there's a desire to have the relationship. So they want it, it's just really uncomfortable, and they're bad at being intimate. Okay, so there's that, and then there's also these cognitive perceptual distortions and eccentricities of behavior. So the stuff that's kind of like schizophrenia light, where it's almost delusion, hallucination. It's kind of this weird behavior and thinking oddly and some perceiving things oddly. Thinking oddly includes ideas of reference, but not to a delusional level. So ideas of reference, usually talking about personal reference. So thinking that random events are about them. Like, oh yeah, it rained yesterday because I was sad. Right? So they may say that, they may think that, but if you press them on it, you say, so you think that your moods control the weather? No, not really. It just kind of feels that way. So they won't persist with it. Somebody who has a delusion disorder, so well, yes, whenever I am sad, it rains, and if I'm happy, the sun shines bright, and they'll believe it, and they'll fight you tooth and nail to defend their belief. For people with schizotypal, it's not that degree of intensity. So they have these ideas of reference, but they're not of a delusional intensity. They may have odd beliefs or magical thinking that influences their behavior and is inconsistent with subcultural norms. So thinking that they have a sixth sense, or that they have ESP, somebody who thinks that would meet criteria if it's inconsistent with subcultural norms, right? If your culture is more accepting of that, let's say you're in the maybe the gypsy culture or certain Native American cultures, and your place in your cultural group is as shaman, or you're a bruja or something, then it wouldn't be inconsistent with your subcultural norms. But if you're Joe Schmo working at Dell in tech support, and you think you can read people's minds, yeah, that's an odd belief. And magical thinking too. It's kind of a thinking that your thoughts have power over the world is one way to think about magical thinking. And oddly enough, sometimes having really bizarre fantasies, if people report having those, it'll meet criteria for this as well, if it's not recognized fully as fantasy. Unusual perceptual experiences, including bodily illusions. So sometimes they say, well, sometimes I feel like someone's in the room watching me. That would be an unusual perceptual experience, thinking that they see ghosts. Again, with the idea being that it's not consistent with their subcultural norms. And then bodily illusions, some feeling as if part of the body's not their own. I was typing today, and all of a sudden it felt like it wasn't my hand typing. It was like I was possessed. It was like some other alien hand. It was really weird. Right? So having those experiences occasionally, again, once it gets to a degree, that symptom might lead to a diagnosis of schizophrenia or another psychotic disorder. This is at a lower degree. You have some kind of weird perceptual experiences. Odd thinking in speech, which we can't see your thinking, but we can see your speech. So when people say just kind of weird and inconsistent things, that we characterize as odd thinking in speech. So I was something like, I went to the grocery store the other day and I was going to get some ham, but they were out of cheese, so I decided to get peanut butter instead because it goes really good with gravy. That's kind of an odd thing to say. It's like, how does that make? How did if you can't follow the connections, it's not disjointed thinking yet. But it's kind of this odd thinking. It just has a different flavor to it. Suspicious or paranoid ideation, which we see in paranoid personality disorder, right? So these people that are suspicious and think about people maybe being out to get them. So we talked before about symptom overlap. So if you're, you can see how it'd be easy to get diagnosed with both paranoid personality disorder and schizotypal personality disorder if you had a bunch of schizotypal criteria and you had this particular one involving paranoia. Inappropriate or constricted affect. Inappropriate affect would be laughing at something that's sad, crying at something that's funny. So somebody tells you that their mom died and you laugh at them. That's inappropriate affect. Constricted affect is that what we talked about before about restricted affect, where they don't show a wide emotional range. Behavior or appearance that is odd. So just being kind of weird. Wearing a cape to school in high school. That would be odd appearance and odd behavior. Lack of a close confidence other than first degree relatives, which is a verbatim same criteria that's in schizoid personality disorder. So again, you see why there's some overlap here. And then excessive social anxiety that doesn't diminish with familiarity and tends to be associated with paranoid fears. So somebody who's schizoid thinking won't have much social anxiety because they won't They just don't want to be around people, and it doesn't bother them, but they don't enjoy it, so they don't do it. People with schizotypal, they may want to be around people, but they experience a lot of social anxiety. And even if they get to know you, the anxiety doesn't really go away. And they'll, in the back of their mind, they'll be thinking, oh, is this person out to get me? What are they doing? There's that paranoia behind it that's contributing to their experience of anxiety. Okay, moving on to the cluster B personality disorders. These ones where individuals may appear dramatic, emotional, or erratic. Right? So it's about instability and drama. It includes antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder. Start off with antisocial. A pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others, occurring since age 15, as indicated by 3 of the following. Okay, so if you don't care about the rights of others and you violate the rights of others, how would you show that? Right? And obviously, one way would be punch somebody in the face, steal their stuff, but there are other ways too. If you were maybe CEO of a tobacco company and you knew your product killed people, but you promoted it anyway in order to make lots of money, that would be consistent with disregard for and violation of the rights of others. Let's look at the criteria. So, failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors, which is a very fancy way of saying getting arrested. Right? So, social norms being the law, respect to lawful behaviors. So, if you do illegal stuff and get arrested, or even if you don't get arrested, if you break the law, that meets criteria. Deceitfulness, so lying, using aliases, conning others for profit, or sometimes just for pleasure, just enjoying lying to people and fooling people. Impulsivity or failure to plan ahead, with the idea being that, well, if you're worried about other people, you will plan ahead. But if you're just worried about yourself and you don't care about the rights of others, then no reason to plan ahead. And whenever you feel like doing something, you do it. And so there's greater impulsivity. Irritability and aggressiveness, which the aggressiveness obviously makes sense that sometimes if you need to get your way and you don't care about other people, you'll have to rough them up. The irritability doesn't fit as much with the idea of antisocial personality disorder, but it occurs enough with people that have these other features that it becomes a diagnostic criteria. Reckless disregard for the safety of self or others. So, drunk driving. That's reckless disregard for the safety of self or others. You're putting yourself in harm's way and anybody in the car with you and anybody else on the road you might come across. That would meet criteria for that. Consistent irresponsibility. So again, you have certain responsibilities, certain obligations, but you consistently don't follow through on them. So the person that lives at home with their parents and doesn't help out with the rent, and maybe you're supposed to have this job, supposed to pay some rent, but you just call in sick sometimes because you don't feel like going. Right, and maybe you're supposed to pay this child support, and you're like, I'm not really going to do that. Right, that would meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder. So not meeting your responsibilities because you don't care about other people's rights, right? And then a lack of remorse because it's all about not caring about other people's rights. And this lack of remorse is where some people think, okay, this sounds very much like sociopaths. And there is some overlap between antisocial personality disorder and sociopathy, but there is no diagnostic category for being a sociopath, the key feature of which seems to be lack of remorsefulness. But again, you don't have to have lack of remorse to meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder. So there's some difference. If you look at people who are diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, some of them will be sociopaths. Some of them will be psychopaths, people that take pleasure inflicting pain on others. But not all of them. They can be a fairly diverse group. And just looking at the criteria, you can see that most people that are in prison, some that are in jail, but most people that are in prison meet criteria, right? Getting arrested. Usually, once you've gotten arrested, you've lied a fair bit, and if you've gotten arrested, you probably didn't plan ahead, or you would have gotten away with it. And so, not surprising that it's a high rate of diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder in the prison population. Not all of which probably have that personality disorder, because a lot of times the reason we can go back and say, okay, well, you meet criteria, but here's kind of the circumstance situation that led to that behavior, and it's not a consistent pattern. You weren't always this way. You're not kind of a habitual criminal, always disregarding the rights of others, or somebody who is trying to support their family and through a variety of reasons and circumstances was not able to do it in an illegal way, and so had to violate the rights of others, but felt bad about it, didn't want to do it. So there may be criteria for the disorder, but they'll look different than other people who really have the disorder. Other criteria: the individual is at least 18 years of age, which the other personality disorders don't have this criteria in there. You can be diagnosed earlier. There's a tendency not to diagnose personality disorders much earlier than 18, though, just for the simple fact that personality isn't very stable before 18. It really increases in stability not even until your 30s, late 20s, or early 30s. You start to see more stability in both normal personality and pathological personality, such that a lot of teenagers look, as we'll talk about, like borderline personality disorder in a little bit. They look fairly borderline, and it's fairly normative to be unstable and to have unstable affect and not sure of who you are. So instability of identity, that's kind of part of typical adolescence for a lot of people. So we try not to diagnose these things in kids. You can, if the pattern's been there for a year and is causing significant distress and impairment. So you have it's possible, but it doesn't happen often. But antisocial personality disorder has this proviso on there that you have to be at least 18 to be diagnosed with this, and that's partially because there are other disorders related to this, like conduct disorder. So you have to have been diagnosed with conduct disorder before the age of 15, or at least there's evidence of it. If we look back at your school records and your juvenile criminal record, you would have met criteria for conduct disorder, which conduct disorder is basically the kid version of antisocial personality disorder, somebody that's always breaking the rules. But for conduct disorder, you don't necessarily need to disregard the rights of others. It's just really, if you have bad conduct, if you keep breaking the rules, you get conduct disorder. You run away, you get in fights, you set things on fire. But the thing is, to call this thing a personality disorder, you should have been doing stuff like that early on, in early adolescence. People who didn't ever get in trouble with the law, and then get older, and because of maybe certain circumstances in their life, turn to a life of crime. They aren't thought to have the personality disorder. They're thought to just be criminals. So you have to have conduct disorder evidence before the age of 15. So you probably would have been diagnosed with conduct disorder, and then once you turn 18, you may or may not then meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder. Everybody who has antisocial personality disorder did meet criteria for conduct disorder, right? But not everybody who meets criteria for conduct disorder when they're 13, 14, 15 will go on to meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder. A significant portion of them will, but not all of them. So it's not there are these different developmental trajectories, and just because you have a diagnosis at point A, we still don't know where you're going to end up at point B or point C on in the future. And then last criteria for antisocial, it does not occur only in the course of schizophrenia or a manic episode. So when people are manic, sometimes they are very irresponsible, and because they're feeling good and they're seeking to augment their pleasure, and so they're maybe doing high-risk things, endangering themselves and others, and maybe even disregarding the rights of others. Somebody will go spend their mortgage, which the rest of the family doesn't appreciate, but they'll spend their mortgage at the roulette wheel because they're feeling good. If it's just when you're manic, then it's not antisocial personality disorder, it's bipolar disorder. Okay. Borderline personality disorder. Characterized by a pervasive pattern of instability in interpersonal relationships, self-image, and affect, and marked impulsivity is indicated by 5 of the following. So, borderline personality disorder is about instability. Unstable relationships, unstable self-image, and unstable affect. And then impulsivity, which impulsivity is, just really another word in some ways for instability of behavior. You never know what you're going to do, because when something comes to your head, you do it. So the symptoms: frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. So we'll talk about dependent personality disorder in a little bit, which is people that have a very clingy and fear separation, and they'll try to avoid separation. But it's different, qualitatively different than in borderline personality disorder. In borderline personality disorder, there's very much this push-pull where they don't want you to leave, but they're not dependent on you either. But they'll do things to try to keep from being abandoned, including suicidal gestures. But then, pretty quickly, they'll change track again, because it's all about instability. So, you're going to leave, I'm going to pull you close, and as soon as you get close, I'm going back to pushing you away. Right? And because of that, we see a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships, which are typically characterized by idealization and devaluation alternating. So people that they're in a relationship with, they'll alternately idealize them. Oh, you are the best ever. You're so understanding, so sweet, so wonderful. And then in a relatively short amount of time, may move to devaluation. You are such a scumbag. You don't care about me at all, and you're the worst person ever, and I hate you. You're horrible. And then they could go right back to idealization. I'm so sorry. You are the best. I don't know what I was thinking. Right. So seeing people as all good or all bad, and because they'll alternately see you as all good or all bad, it's going to lead to unstable relationships, and it's going to be intense. Right. If you're in a relationship with somebody and they say you're the best ever, that's going to be an intense experience. And then if they say you're the worst ever, and I wish I'd never met you, that's an intense interpersonal experience as well. Not surprisingly, we see identity disturbance. So this is about having an unstable self-image, which again, there could be kind of idealization, devaluation of the self. So, no, I'm really great. I'm good at everything, and people don't understand how good I am, or I'm horrible. I'm not worth anything. In just kind of my own clinical experience, there tends to be more devaluation of the self among people with borderline personality disorder. At times, they will move to acting as if they think they're great, but at the core, there seems to be a real devaluing of the self, and not thinking that they are worthwhile, which that in itself is an identity disturbance. Impulsivity in at least two areas that are self-damaging. So spending sprees when you're not super rich, having lots of unprotected sex, substance abuse, binging would fall in this, reckless driving. So doing things on the spur of the moment that aren't good for you. Again, with the idea being, okay, there's some emotion usually, and then I'm going to do some impulsive behavior in response to that emotion without thinking about the consequences. Recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or threats, or self-mutilating behavior. So people often think about, so the cutting. Yeah, and cutting is one type of self-mutilation that occurs. There are other forms, burning, even pinching, twisting. In some ways causing pain, and most usually in such a way that it leaves a visible mark. And we also have the recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, and threats. And with borderline personality disorder, some people think that these threats are solely manipulative. They never really do it. It's just part of that idealization, devaluation. It's part of the interpersonal instability that whenever they think you're going to go away, they're going to act suicidal. And I think there is some of that, but there's also some very real suicidal ideation where they're highly ambivalent about it, and at times they really do want to die. And that way, it's one reason it can be tricky to work with individuals with borderline personality disorder, because it can be hard to distinguish between manipulative suicidal threats and ones that are really reflections of a wish to die. And what I usually tell my grad students is, it in some ways it doesn't matter in terms of what you do, because if even if it's manipulative, it's not uncommon for them to make some gesture. They'll take some pills, cut a little bit, and then to take more pills than they anticipated, cut deeper than they thought they would, or they take some pills and they think the roommate's going to come home and find them, but the roommate has a flat tire, and they'll be just as dead if they meant to kill themselves as if they didn't. So I always tell people, it doesn't matter if it's manipulative. You need to react in an appropriate, clinically appropriate way. So we see suicidal behavior, gestures, and threats, sometimes manipulative, sometimes a reflection of real wanting to escape emotional pain. And then the self-mutilating behavior, I think, is one of the things that disturbs people the most. It's probably one of the least understood phenomenon that we talk about. But it's something that I think is highly variable. People do it differently. People do it for different reasons. People say, "Oh, why do you do it?" Different reasons, and different reasons for the individuals, and for one individual, sometimes different reasons, different times. One reason, sometimes, is it's a way of dealing with emotional pain. So there's this emotional pain, and it feels so horrible. I don't know what to do. But then when I cut, and I see the blood, and I feel that physical pain, I stop thinking about the other pain. I stop feeling the emotional pain, and all I feel is that emotional pain. And there's a sense of peace, usually a brief one, that comes with that the cessation of the emotional pain when your attention is directed at the bodily pain. So I've had people talk about that. People talk about doing it to feel something, right, where they've gotten to a point where they're just they've been so emotional up and down that they're generally numb, and then when they're not numb, they're experiencing extreme emotions. But to get out of the numbness, sometimes they'll cause self-harm to, again, feel something, to kind of make sure that they can still feel alive. And then some people will self-mutilate manipulatively. They'll do it for people say, "Oh, for attention," which there are a lot easier ways to get attention than cutting yourself. So I don't think it's ever as simple as that, but that can feed into the behavior and can be one of the motivating factors. Is that the expected impact it'll have on other people? But I'd say that's probably one of the lesser motivations, and usually people that self-harm are shameful of it, and they'll hide it. See them wearing long sleeves in the summer, and they don't, they're not out there showing their scars. And, "Oh, do you want to ask me about how I cut myself?" They're hiding it because there is a sense of shame attached to it. Okay, affective instability due to marked reactivity of mood. And this is about mood changes, but it's not mood changing randomly or out of nowhere, right? We talk about bipolar disorder before, where sometimes the mania or depression, there won't be an identifiable trigger for a mood episode always, but they'll suddenly feel really good. Borderline personality disorder is different. This is about mood changing significantly in reaction to other inputs. That's what marked reactivity is. It reacts to, and it can react to environmental things, where somebody says something nice to you, somebody says something mean to you. It can be internal things. You happen to have some memory of something bad that happened to you before, or you reflect upon maybe improvements you've made in your life. But the idea that the emotional experience is a bit of a roller coaster, and it goes up and down in response to things in the world, more than other people. Like, all of us have some mood reactivity. They have marked mood reactivity, so influenced more easily by external events and to a greater degree. Chronic feelings of emptiness. It's kind of like that numbness I talked about before, which again makes sense. If you feel empty and kind of like there's nothing, then how do you get rid of the emptiness? Create some drama. right? So doing that to help get rid of these feelings of emptiness and the void. Might also have inappropriate or intense anger or difficulty controlling anger, which remember we saw before with paranoid personality disorder, a tendency to react to perceived slights with anger. So again, angry outbursts apply to both disorders, but in this one, it may be harder to see the perceived slight, but it can be in reaction to perceived slights. And it can be harder sometimes for people that aren't close to the person to understand where the anger is coming from. But it does seem to be that sometimes this bottled up emotion erupts in the form of anger. And then the last one, transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. So again, similar to paranoia, you can have paranoid ideation, but it's transient, it's temporary, and it's usually stress-related. So in times of intense stress, which, as you might expect, people with borderline personality disorder recurrently have intense, stressful experiences. So intense fight in a relationship, maybe even tough time at school. Think about college students. Finals week is coming up. They may have these periods of paranoid ideation or dissociative symptoms where they'll experience, derealization, depersonalization, some dissociative amnesia, perhaps. Not uncommon to see some of those dissociative symptoms cropping up in people with borderline personality disorder during times of intense emotion. It's a way of, again, thought to be a way of them protecting themselves when it's just too much emotion, too much stimulation, too much neural activity. However you want to think about it, they separate from the typical cognitive processes become separated or dissociated, where they either feel that they're not real, or the world's not real, or they'll forget some things. Okay, histrionic personality disorder, pervasive pattern of excessive emotionality and attention seeking, as indicated by 5 of the following. So this is one of those disorders that is thought to be pathologizing severe or hyper femininity. We think about people who score high measures of femininity, expressing emotion and experiencing lots of emotions tends to be associated more with women than with men. And then attention-seeking versus wanting to be alone also seems to be associated more with women than men. But we could see, hopefully you could see that it would make sense to possibly have a diagnosis for insufficient emotionality and rejection of attention-seeking, but we don't so much have that. But individuals who have histrionic personality disorder are uncomfortable in situations in which he or she is not the center of attention. So at a party, if somebody else is more entertaining, more attractive, getting more attention than them, they will ratchet up their behavior to deal with that, to regain the center of attention, or they'll leave because they won't be comfortable with it. Right? Interaction with others is characterized by inappropriate, sexually seductive, or provocative behavior. So, when you're interacting with somebody who they don't know very well, reaching over and putting their hand on their thigh. No, it's just so great talking to you. I feel really close to you right now. And they just met them. That will be consistent with histrionic personality disorder. Which, again, this is applied differently. So, a woman who's sexually aggressive might be thought to be inappropriately seductive or provocative. A man who goes up to a woman in a bar and says, "Hi, nice shoes. Do you want to go home and have sex with me?" He's thought to be a jerk, but not necessarily is he thought to have histrionic personality disorder. Right? So gender roles are playing a role here. Displays rapidly shifting and shallow expressions of emotion. So in borderline personality disorder, we have these shifts of emotion, but they're intense, so they're deep. These are shallow expressions of emotions. Oh yes, it was so horrible. We lost my dog yesterday, and I cried, and it was horrible. But then it was so wonderful because I got a new puppy, and it's so great. So they will talk about things, and it's not like the schizoid where it's like this, but it's not no emotion, but it's shallow emotions. So the sadness isn't very deep on the surface, and even the happiness isn't deep, and it seems they can shift easily from one to the other. So it feels disingenuine. Consistently uses physical appearance to draw attention to self. So if you dress nice, histrionic personality disorder. But individuals who really meet criteria for disorder tend to be identifiable in terms of they dress differently than other people. So it'll be excessive adornments, jewelry, clothes. So for women, lots of bracelets, necklaces. For men, the open shirt and the big chains. Probably was it the Jersey Shore people with the tanning and the gym and the laundry. So doing a lot of stuff to your physical appearance to get people to look at you would be consistent with histrionic personality disorder. They have an impressionistic style of speech that lacks detail. So if you ask them about what they do for a living, I like to talk to people and I sell things and I buy things and it's just fabulous. What? Like, you're not sure what exactly they're talking about. It's, again, there's a lack of depth there where they seem a bit disingenuine. Self-dramatization, theatricality, and exaggerated expression of emotion. So again, it kind of goes back to being the center of attention. They'll talk about themselves and be very dramatic about it, and they may swoon. Lots of use of nonverbal behaviors in terms of gesturing with the hands to get their points across, and really exaggerating their emotional communications. They tend to be pretty suggestible in terms of, wouldn't you agree that, Snoopy would make a great president? Oh, yes, that's a great idea. So the idea that they don't have any kind of core convictions, and that to maintain attention from others, they will tend to agree to other things quite easily. And then they tend to consider relationships more intimate than they actually are. Oh, my dear friend, who I've known for ages. Oh, I just love him. I love her. And it's their dry cleaner who they've gone to for the past 2 weeks. So they tend to perceive greater intimacy than the other person would acknowledge. So again, excessive emotionality, but not emotionality in the same way that we see in borderline personality disorder. This is more surface level. Everything's at the surface. It's all about attention and me and drama, but we don't see as much of the intensity in borderline personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder, a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior. So either imagining you're great or acting as if you're great. Need for admiration and lack of empathy as indicated by 5 of the following. So here we see this lack of empathy. Well, that sounds kind of like antisocial personality disorder, doesn't it? And yeah, that it can be hard to distinguish sometimes between the two, because are you disregarding their feelings, or are you not aware of their feelings? Which is it? And for narcissists, the idea is that they have a lower awareness of other people's feelings because they're so focused on their own. Whereas somebody with antisocial personality disorder might be aware of your feelings, but they don't give a crap. Okay? So things we see: grandiose sense of self-importance. So again, thinking you're the best. Preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Right? So I'm going to be the greatest ever, the most powerful, or this relationship is going to be one that goes down in storybooks. People will probably write songs about it. It's probably a movie, because this love that I feel and that I'm capable of will be beyond what anybody else can feel. But again, it's about the self and not so much about the other person. Believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special people. So again, kind of looking down on others. and I pity you. You know that you can't really relate to me because you're not special like me. They tend to require excessive admiration, which means that they tend to be uncomfortable and not the center of attention. Which, who else is like that? Oh yeah, the one we just talked about, histrionic personality disorder. So again, we see this overlap. But the reaction tends to be a little different. For histrionic, when not the center of attention, they'll ratchet up their behavior to get more attention. For somebody who's narcissistic, if they're not the center of attention, their reaction is more likely to be anger, right, and kind of scorn for, how dare you not recognize my superiority. Versus histrionic is more, well, I just need to draw more attention to myself if I'm not getting it. Has a sense of entitlement. You should give me things because, of course, I deserve them. You should type up all the notes from class for me. It'd be much easier for me to read that way, and I could learn better. So I need you to do that and go ahead and highlight a textbook for me so I can just look at the important parts because I don't really have time for the less important parts. Is interpersonally exploitive, which again overlap here with antisocial personality disorder. But the difference is with antisocial personality disorder, they're not necessarily exploiting you because they think they're better, just because they want to. They're enjoying it or they're getting something out of it. For somebody who's a narcissist, they're exploiting you because you're not as good as them. So of course they're gonna make you mow their lawn and not pay you, right? Or come up with some sort of shady business deal where you're getting ripped off. As we already talked about, lacks empathy. Interestingly, is often envious of others, right? Or believes that others are envious of him or her, which the second half kind of makes more sense. But the first half is interesting because it suggests that for some people with narcissistic personality disorder, there is an insecurity, right? So that they think they're great, but then they see other people and they envy them, and but usually it's they envy what they have, and they don't believe the other people are deserving of what they have, but I am. How do they have all that? They have that successful singing career, but I sing better than they do. That's so stupid. They must have cheated their way to the top. The world is so unfair. Right? So envious because people have stuff that they should have. And then lastly, arrogant or haughty behaviors or attitudes, which is consistent with most people think about narcissism. Okay, the last cluster, cluster C, individuals may appear anxious or fearful, includes avoidant personality disorder, dependent, and obsessive compulsive. So we have kind of the odd cluster A. We have the erratic, dramatic cluster B. In cluster B, you might even see, well, antisocial narcissistic more or less go together, and borderline histrionic go together, but then there are other overlaps as well. And then now in cluster C, we have the anxious, fearful disorders. For avoidant personality disorder, pervasive pattern of social inhibition, feelings of inadequacy, and hypersensitivity to negative evaluation as indicated by 4 of the following. So this is the one that I mentioned before. We talked about social phobia generalized type. Remember, social phobia is about fear of being negatively evaluated in a particular situation. And generalized type is fear of being negatively evaluated in every situation. How is that different from avoidant personality disorder? Doesn't seem to be. And if we look at people who are diagnosed with one or the other, and then we give them, similar assessments, they'll look the same. In many cases, it seems to be the same phenomenon, just diagnosed differently depending on what therapist they went to see. Nonetheless, let's take a look at the criteria. Avoids occupational activities that involve significant interpersonal contact because of fears of criticism, disapproval, or rejection. So, because you're worried people are going to judge you negatively, you give up certain work things. Maybe don't seek out a certain promotion, or you can work on this team, and if you do well, you get promoted, or you can do stuff by yourself. I'll do stuff by myself, even though it's not in my best interest for my career. I don't want to get judged. Unwilling to get involved with people unless certain of being liked, which again makes sense if there's this fear of being evaluated. Well, if I know that they're going to like me, then it's easier to get involved. Shows restraint within intimate relationships because of fear of being shamed or ridiculed. So unwilling to get involved, shows restraint. Generally the same criteria there. Just with the first one being more general and the second one being more targeted toward intimate relationships. So not only hesitant or unwilling to start a relationship, somebody that they know kind of well, they'll still be pretty restrained as they're getting to know them better because of being a fear of being shamed. That they're going to find out the real me, which is horrible, unlovable, unworthy. Preoccupied with being criticized or rejected in social settings. So again, go to a party and they think everybody's eyes are on them and they're judging them negatively. Inhibited in new interpersonal situations because of feelings of inadequacy, which makes sense. So they don't do much. They're inhibited. They don't go introduce themselves. And it's because they feel that they're not good enough. View themselves as socially inept, personally unappealing, or inferior to others, and are usually reluctant to take personal risks or engage in any new activities because they may prove embarrassing. They maybe they're at the beach and see people parasailing. It looks like fun, but if I got up there, I'd probably my swimsuit would fall off and everybody would laugh at me. It'd be on YouTube, right? So not going to try this thing, this new activity, because I might get embarrassed. People will laugh, will make fun. Okay. Which again, a lot of overlap there with social phobia, generalized type. Dependent personality disorder, a pervasive need to be taken care of that leads to submissive, clinging behavior and fears of separation, as indicated by 5 of the following. Difficulty making everyday decisions without an excessive amount of advice and reassurance from others. Right, so, now what do you think I should wear? The red one or the blue one? The red one? Are you sure? The red one's good? I don't look ugly? Okay, fine. Okay, good. So, small decisions, big decisions, I don't know where to go to school. What do you think? Okay, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Okay, y'all think this? Okay, what do you think that's right? I don't know. I'm not sure if it's right. Always relying on others to make the big decisions rather than taking responsibility for yourself. Needs others to assume responsibility for major areas of his or her life. So they don't pay their own bills. They cede responsibility for the major areas of their life to other people, basically meeting their responsibilities, financial, familial, occupational, otherwise. They have difficulty expressing disagreement with others because of a fear of loss of support or approval. So they tend to we talked before about people being suggestible at going along with things. Well, people who have dependent personality disorder, there's overlap here, will also go along with things. They won't argue. Chinese, that sounds great. You want to have fish? Sounds good. Even though maybe they're allergic to fish, they don't want you to think less of them, so they'll go and they'll not eat it, or they'll shove it under their napkin, whatever. Has difficulty initiating projects or doing things on his or her own. Again, being dependent on others to get things started. Goes to excessive lengths to obtain nurturance and support from others, including volunteers to do unpleasant things. So this is when sometimes, unfortunately, we see people who have a dependent personality style matched up with somebody who is maybe narcissistic or antisocial, who will make them go to excessive lengths to get a nurturance. Say, oh yeah, we can be friends, or I love you so much, but you know what? I'm not feeling very close to you. Do you think you can go and wash and wax my car and detail it yourself? And don't take it someplace because they'll screw it up. I want you to do it yourself. Right now. Oh, it's 105 outside, I know, but I'd feel better if it were done right now. And somebody who's a dependent personality will go, okay, I'll do that for you. I love you. All right. So to get nurturance, to get support from others, willing to do anything. So somebody that also will just kind of volunteer. Oh, you want me to do that for you? Oh, no, it's not a problem. I'll do it. No, it's easy. Yeah, no, I was gonna do that anyway. I was gonna wash the load. You have these 5 loads. Yeah, no problem. It'll fit in with mine. Yeah, a couple of hours, no problem. I have a test study for, but I'm gonna do that later. So willing to kind of go to lengths to get relational nurturing from others. Feels uncomfortable or helpless when alone, again because of an exaggerated fear of being unable to care for him or herself. So again, we see a kind of a distinction here with borderline personality disorder. So somebody who's has borderline personality disorder doesn't necessarily feel that they can't take care of themselves, but they don't want to be alone, and loneliness is painful. And for some of them, from kind of a psychodynamic point of view, there's this a fear of non-being when I'm not with someone else. Because of the lack of identity, I only really feel like myself when I'm with someone else. So if you leave me, I don't know who I am, and maybe I won't be anymore in a kind of a psychic sense. And it's very kind of psychodynamic. But for dependent personality, it's not as much about that. It's about, I can't do for myself. I need you. I need somebody here to help me. Not necessarily you, but somebody. So they urgently seek another relationship as a source of care and support when a close relationship ends. So as soon as if somebody shuts the door on them and they're sure that they're not going to get them back, okay, well, I better move on to somebody else because I don't really need you. I need someone here to help me. And then lastly is unrealistically preoccupied with fears of being left to take care of him or herself. So this is one of those disorders that kind of brings to mind the idea that, well, where does the pathology lie? Because you can imagine somebody that was like this, to be like this consistently, they would probably need to be in a relationship with somebody that also had some fairly pathological inner experiences and behaviors, right? Somebody who always did for somebody else and took control of somebody else's things. And in some ways, you can imagine somebody being made more dependent, not allowing somebody. So, no, I don't want you to work. I want you to stay home. No, I don't want you to go to school. Oh, you pick that out? That's horrible. No, let me pick out something for you better. Right? You think you know how to balance a checkbook? No, don't be ridiculous. That's stupid. I'll do it. Right? So you can imagine somebody who has a high need for control and enjoys exerting control over another individual could, one, make somebody more dependent, and two, could develop kind of a symbiotic relationship with somebody who was high in dependence. So is this person with dependent personality disorder, is it their pathology, or does the pathology belong in the relationship? Is it a pathological relationship such that if this person weren't in this relationship and met somebody who was healthy, might they then show different behaviors? And that's something to think about. Okay, the last disorder we'll talk about, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Pervasive pattern of preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, and mental or interpersonal control at the expense of flexibility, openness, and efficiency. So, the thing that most people get confused with is, well, what's the difference between OCPD and OCD? Well, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, you have obsessions and or compulsions. With OCPD, you don't. Right? If you have the obsessions or compulsions, you probably have OCD. Right? If you don't have those, you might still have OCD, but that's kind of the rare form when people don't have well-developed obsessions or compulsions, but they have to follow, they have ritualistic behavior that they have to follow according to strict rules. And that's the one kind of case of OCD that really gets hard to distinguish from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. But with OCD, the Axis 1 disorder, those strict rules seem to be restricted to one thing, whereas obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, as the definition of personality disorders implies, is more pervasive. So everything has to be according to rules. Everything has to be perfect or neat. And it's not just someone who's very neat, because many, if not most, of the people I knew who went to medical school, they all looked very OCPD to me, from my point of view. Very perfectionistic, very orderly, but most of them not to the degree that it led to a cost of efficiency. They still got stuff done. So where it leads to a cost and efficiency is when, okay, you've got to write a paper. Before you do, I've got to straighten my desk, and you spend 3 hours straightening your desk, and you never write the paper. Well, that would be obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. You didn't get the paper done because you were so focused on things being orderly and neat. So preoccupation with details, rules, lists, order, organization, or schedules to the extent that the major point of the activity is lost. So you don't get the stuff done, or you don't have fun. If the point of the activity, you go out to have a good time, but you focus so much on all the details and the rules. Okay, we're going to play tennis, but first let's make sure we have the rules straight. And no, that you bounced the ball too many times, or your toss was too high. You've had too many tosses. Whatever. They get too focused on rules, on order, that the point of what they're doing gets lost. They show perfectionism that interferes with task completion. So again, you can't get it done because it has to be perfect. Excessively devoted to work and productivity to the exclusion of leisure activities and friendships. So somebody who's a workaholic might have OCPD. That's one of the criteria. Right, over-conscientious, which, remember, conscientiousness is one of those traits we talked about at the very beginning, ocean. Over-conscientious, scrupulous, and inflexible about matters of morality, ethics, or values. So the inflexibility doesn't just apply to keeping things neat. It's not just there a certain way that things need to be done, in terms of organizing your stuff. In terms of the rules of the world, there's a right and there's a wrong. Right? And if you violate that, then that you're wrong. And no, there's no gray. If you, I don't care if your kid was dying, you shouldn't have stolen that medicine. Stealing is wrong. Right? So an inflexible view of morality or values, and kind of overly conscious, where they're always looking for and trying to be exactly right, and often taking pride in being right in that way. Unable to discard worn-out or worthless objects, even when of no sentimental value. So this is where you get the hoarding. Would fall under obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. For now, it's possible that hoarding will be separated out into its own disorder in the future, or at least as a specifier in the next version of the DSM. But for now, it's kind of where hoarding falls in. Is under OCPD. And then a reluctance to delegate tasks to others unless they submit to your exact way of doing things. Because again, it's about control. So everything's neat, things should be a certain way, and no, I can't let you do it unless I know you're going to do it exactly my way. So if you ever watched that, was that Flipping Out? What's that guy's name? Jeff something or other. People talk about him being OCD. From what I've seen, he looks more OCPD. He has to have things a certain way. He's very much obsessed with perfection, difficulty delegating tasks unless people do things exactly his way. It's about control. He doesn't have obsessions or compulsions, so more OCPD than OCD. Adopts a miserly spending style toward both self and others, so not going to buy you a nice gift for Christmas, which kind of fits in again with that hoarding piece, that I got to keep all this stuff. Because if I keep it, I might need it. You never know. And if I keep it, I have control over it. If I spend it, if I throw it away, I'm giving up control. Obsessive personality disorder is all about that high need for control. And then shows rigidity and stubbornness. Which, again, if things should be a certain way, this is kind of that, and you believe it, and you stick to your guns. Not just, oh yeah, things should be at a right angle on my desk. But you disagree, okay, that's fine. No, they need to be, and they're going to fight you on it. Okay. So OCPD distinct from OCD, but not uncommon to be diagnosed with both, especially if you have hoarding, the perfectionism, or the preoccupation with details. Not uncommon to also experience obsessions or compulsions. So a fairly high rate of comorbidity between OCD and OCPD. But again, not always. Okay, so now thinking about all the things we just talked about, which I know is a lot. There's a lot of disorders here. But thinking about the disorders we've described, go back to that early question, because it's one of the important ones, about does it seem that these things are categories? And okay, well, yeah, this is a type, and it's qualitatively different than anybody else. I don't know anybody that's at all like that. Or do they seem to be things that are more on continuums where you can say, okay, well, I can see somebody who's kind of like that, and somebody who's a little more like that, and somebody else who's kind of like that. Or maybe you think to yourself, oh, I'm a little bit like this, not much like this, or a lot like this. And if, like me, I'll admit my bias here, if you believe it makes more sense to think about it on a continuum, where's the line? Where would you draw the line for something like obsessive compulsive personality disorder? Somebody who's very detail oriented and has to have things a certain way and is very much about control. How do you figure out when that's somebody who likes a lot of control to, okay, no, that's too much. You need too much control. Where do you figure out where that line is? Or somebody who prefers not to take the lead in a relationship, because if both people always want to take the lead and want to decide where to go to dinner, that's going to lead to conflict too, right? Somebody has to give in sometimes. So if somebody is more prone to giving in and giving in to the wants or needs of others, at some level it rises to dependent personality disorder. But again, where's that line? At what point does putting others' needs ahead of yourself, go from being a virtue to being pathology? How do you figure out where that line is? Okay, so those are the kind of things I want you to think about when thinking about these personality disorders, because they are probably the most controversial disorders in the DSM. Okay, that's all for now. Take care.